I've given all the listeners as well like a little template to fill out. So it's just basically who was your first crush, why, how, who, what, when. So, who was your first crush? So I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I know there are going to be some eyebrows to it. But I remember looking up at the screen one day and seeing this big, tall, powerful, fiery blue-haired man commanding the room. Serious daddy energy. He was evil, but in a consensually and contractually binding way. Everything is negotiated, clear terms, safe words adjacent. I was on it. How did it pan out? Now, as a woman in my 20s, I just want to get slammed against the desk by him and dramatically rip off his toga, which is probably concealing something in caps. Okay. Welcome back to another episode of Sexonomic Guys, and it is just a solo this week. So every third week of the month will be a solo episode, usually. I'm not saying always and definitely because life happens and things get in the way, but I'm bringing back a segment that I did last year called Anonymous Voices. And the idea is that we get to hear the listener's voice on the podcast. We get to hear all of your stories, all of your gossip, all of your tea, all of your everything, and we get to go into the inner cavity not of your bottom but into your mind, and we share and relate around different subjects. So for example, this week we're doing first crushes, so your childhood crushes, and we're going to listen to different stories and different situations that the listeners / viewers have been through. And then, for example, another week it might be first kiss or holiday romance or X, Y, and Z. You get the idea. So guys, first crushes. When I've been asking people about their first crushes for this episode, or I've just heard stories, there always seems to be a common thread that there's a lot more innocence to them and a lot more like playfulness of why they had a crush on that person. For example, I think so much of adult attraction is based around situation and circumstance and leverage and what that person can offer you and what kind of gaps in your life you need filling. Not like that, but you know, what holes in your life could you do with someone coming along to complement those missing parts that you might need help with. But I feel in childhood, you just vibe. You fancy the people who you just think are cool and, you know, interesting. And yeah, it's more about who the person is in front of you in that moment rather than being appreciative of all the things they could do for you, right? I've never heard of someone in kindergarten or reception, you know, fancying someone because they had high status or power, because I don't think that dynamic has come into play at that age. I've been doing some research and some kind of background analysis, not too deeply, but just on the surface level of what makes a childhood crush and what kind of marker does it give to us for our growth and our emotional growth and everything that follows us into the adult development of our brains and obviously attraction. And some of the stuff is very interesting. So the first takeaway is that they are psychologically absolutely normal. Commonly, psychologists see them as part of an early social and emotional learning experience. It's your first time outside of your family viewing romantic relationships and you're figuring out what works for you. So think of it as an essential building block in a child's psyche. Number 2, most children's crushes are proximity based. How the actual formation of the crush manifests in childhood is very logical. Research shows that most children form attachments from people they know regularly, such as classmates, neighbours or teachers, and obviously family and parents. This happens in adulthood too, but proximity does more of the work and plays a larger role because children's worlds socially and the choices that come with that are often a lot more smaller than an adult's world. So you can often understand why a child's social barometer feels a lot more sensitive and heightened because the world is smaller. Like smaller little moves mean bigger things in such a smaller tank. But, you know, for example, if someone stole my water out of the fridge that I brought to the office, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I'd be annoyed, but to a child, if that was one of only a few things going on in their life, it could feel like the world is imploding. So that's interesting. Number 3, early crushes are driven by admiration and safety. Kids often confuse feeling seen, helped, protected with romantic interest because the emotional vocabulary is still developing at that age. Number 4, many first crushes are fictional or unattainable. Studies on parasocial attachment show that children often have a strong bond with characters from TV shows, films, or books. These crushes feel safe because they require no risk, no rejection, or real-world interaction, making them especially appealing at a young age. And then when I was researching around that and coming up with that summary of what I was reading, it went on to touch where adults carry that idea of unattainable crushes or relationships or attraction towards people into their adulthood, and how often people will, without sounding horrible, pick or allow themselves to manifest rather than pick, because you don't have a choice on who you are attracted to, but unrealistic crushes or unattainable as a form of avoidance rather than commitment and running away from the vulnerability it takes to commit to someone. Think about someone who has a constant pattern of getting into long distance relationships, to be in a long distance relationship once, okay, that's interesting, you'll navigate your way around it and you'll decide if you want to become closer and move geographically closer together, or you'll decide if you want to keep it long distance. And if you do want to keep it long distance, obviously that's a bit more of an unconventional relationship and different from the norms, but it could also mean that you are creating distance between yourself and the other person in fear of actually meeting in the middle and having that vulnerability. It could mean also people who are choosing to only pursue people because of how they look or, their beauty or how they present. I think that's a form of avoidance because you're assessing people by the most easiest and consumable part of themselves. But actually for longevity, you'd want to take that shell off and understand who the person is on the inside. And I think sometimes people try to go out or court or have a crush on people who have such a beautiful shell or what they deem to be the most attractive shell for them, but they don't care to dig deeper into that person because they don't care to know the inside, and that's their form of avoidance because they just want to connect without fully connecting and to be seen in a relationship but not actually truly be in a relationship. Number 5, childhood crushes are largely non-verbal. At that age, attraction is expressed through attention, imitation, and nervous behaviour rather than direct communication. It's also a large reason why you get the saying of, oh, boys are only mean to you when they fancy you, which I don't think is a helpful thing to teach young girls because it just gets them used to the idea of men being mean to them. Number 6, embarrassment is a key emotional marker. Developmental psychologists note that shame and self-awareness emerge alongside early childhood crushes, which is why they often feel very intense and are very memorable. Finally, but not lastly, number 7, early crushes help shape adult attraction. Long-term studies suggest early preferences for kindness, humour, or confidence often carry into later relationships. It's important to be conscious of your childhood crushes and understand why you have them and how they can go on to form the building blocks in your future of how you engage with other people on a romantic but also friendship-based level. But on the other hand, you also have to be mindful that memory distorts childhood crushes over time. Adults often tend to romanticize or cringe at them due to the nostalgia bias. I think that point is often well proven by when you do decide to get back with your childhood love or crush or whoever it is, and it's often very, very different from how you both remembered it. So my childhood crush was a guy called Greg, and it's not that I wanted to kiss him, it's not that I wanted to make out with him. I didn't even really understand what any of that was at that point, but I just remember really wanting him to really like me. I always used to hang around with boys in my actual childhood, and I had a few friends who were girls, but predominantly it was a group of boys. And I always felt that they really liked me as a friend and they saw me as an equal, and that was what I was definitely going for, coming from a family of men. But I was never really the girl they fancied. I was also a tomboy. I hated dressing up. I hated any game where I had to pretend to be a damsel in distress. I just hated it. In fact, I remember doing like it wasn't like a school play, but it was something we were doing in assembly. And assembly is basically where all of the different classes go to the hall and you're covering a subject and you all sit and listen and whatever. It's like a big team meeting if you don't understand what that is in America. And I had to do a part where I had to say, what was the line? What did I have to say? I was paired with a boy and I had to make some reference to, I like to be rescued. And then he had to give me like a kiss on my cheek. And I just really hated the whole ordeal. But I wasn't a super feminine little girl. I think part of that as well was I wanted to prove to all my cousins all my cousins are boys, and obviously a lot of my family are male. I wanted to prove that I'm just as tough as them, because I really noticed maybe that people perceive girls as not tough, and being tough is like a currency. It's not to say that I wasn't cute, like I was a very cute kid, but I was just more of oddball and cute rather than cute girly girl cute. But the same thing would happen over and over and over again. The boys I grew up would really like me, respect me and play with me, but they never fancied me, they never, were like, oh my god, I really fancy her. And after this happening over and over again, I started to realize by the beginning of my early teenage years or like tween years, in order to make boys like me, it's not about being who I am, but I have to be the most consumable thing that they like in order to get them to like me. Well, not the inwards me, but to direct attention towards me. I had to seem more rescuable and I had to seem more soft. I can't believe it's Greg who fucking triggered all of this, God. But I do remember being sad about it a little bit, not deeply sad, but just being airy fairy and soft and shy. It just wasn't who I was. It wasn't firstly who I came out of the womb as, and it's definitely not who I was raised as. Like, I hated pink, I hated anything with hearts on, because I just saw it as like girly whirly and weak. Like, I was a Power Rangers fan, and I remember Greg really connected with that over me, and I was like, oh my god, I'm a cool Power Rangers girl, and why can't he like me for being a Power Rangers girl? Like, why do I have to like princesses? Now as an adult and I've watched Gone Girl, that's why I really like the monologue about Cool Girl, because I think it speaks to a lot of the inconvenience women have to do in order to not even be liked for who they are, but just like direct male attention towards them, because we're all human, we all like attention. And that not actually being true to who the person is, Honestly, if you've never watched Gone Girl, I urge you to watch it, because you end up rooting for like the anti-hero. It just basically summarizes how much being traditionally beautiful, likable in the male gaze / male sphere is directly correlated on how well you play this character of cool girl who, always stays a size 8. She can drink a tin of beer and eat pizza and not put on weight. And she can also crack jokes and she's not too serious. And, she makes him feel like the man. And that's not going to be every woman, is it? Anyway, I'm not saying that the murderer, Amy June, in that is the archetype of how women should act as a deterrent of all of those things, but I'm just saying it's interesting how the story is explained. We're going to get onto the listeners' anonymous stories now. Okay, number 1. The title of this one is called Glitter Pen Romeo. I've given all the listeners as well like a little template to fill out, so it's just basically who was your first crush, why, how, who, what, when. So, who was your first crush? His name was Toby Lord. We were in reception and I remember shifting from friendship to fancying him over some glitter pens in Golden Time. Basically in Britain, Golden Time is on the Friday afternoon before you go home for the weekend. If you've been good, you get time to like play with whatever you want for an hour or two, and that's called Golden Time in the UK. How it happened was myself and Toby had always gotten on in our little group of friends. Some boys, some girls. But in our Golden Time, myself and Toby started playing with these glittery glue pens. I think it's the ones where you squeeze them out and it's glittery and glibby. We smothered them on different coloured papers and I found myself attracted to him and his willingness to try different variations of the glitter pens and papers. I then remember putting him some pink and green glitter on my hands and then saying, I think the green is more your colour than the pink. Whenever we had a non-uniform day for the rest of the year, I wore green every single time. How did it pan out? We stayed friends for the whole time of primary school and then high school and are still in touch now, but only very vaguely. In high school, we both attended a house party where we kissed, but I found out he kissed like a frog and it felt really awkward. The mystique was crushed forever, but still, great guy. Not everything is meant to happen the way you think it should, and that's fine, I guess. Number 2, school play awkwardness. Who was your first crush? I genuinely don't remember his name, but you can say George. It was when I was in kindergarten when I was 4 or 5. He was 1 year older than me and he had blondish/light hair and I thought he was really nice, lol. We were in a play together and he played the prince, and because I had a crush on him, I felt so embarrassed to act next to him, but I think I managed to be professional and did the play well. How did it pan out? I never told him and I don't think he ever knew. He went to school somewhere and I went to school somewhere else. His mum and my mum did give birth at the same time in the same hospital a couple of years later. That is so relatable. I understand you. I always feel like when I really fancy someone, I act like you when you were a child. I don't want to speak to them. I want to ignore them. I like, if anything, they probably think I hate them rather than fancy them and show them attention. So this is very relatable. Number 3, the title is it normal it was a cartoon character? Yes, it is normal. As we said in the research, a lot of children have parasocial relationships with fictional characters because it often feels more safer and doesn't mean you have to put yourself forward for a lot of vulnerability. And plus, you don't really know what's on offer for you and what's not on offer for you. So who was your first crush? So I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I know there are going to be some eyebrows to it. But my first crush was Hades from the Disney version of Hercules. At the time, I remember my older sister watching the VHS tape, and I never really paid much attention to what she'd watch because she was 3 years older than me. I was CBeebies, she was CBBC. But I remember looking up at the screen one day and seeing this big, tall, powerful, fiery blue-haired man commanding the room. Serious daddy energy. I was 6 at the time and I didn't quite realise what I was feeling, but I knew I was feeling something. I knew I liked the confidence, the charisma, most importantly, the sarcasm. I think the reason I found him hot is because he was always annoyed. Perhaps I have a thing for permanently exacerbated men with good dictation. He was evil, but in a consensually and contractually binding way. Everything is negotiated, clear terms, safe words adjacent. I was on it. How did it pan out? Keeping it real, I still fancy him now. Not as much because his plans did collapse in the film, but I still have a taste for him. Now as a woman in my 20s, I just want to get slammed against the desk by him and dramatically rip off his toga, which is probably concealing something in caps. Okay. That's good for him. Good for Hades. Wow. Number 4 and the final one, title Hots for Teacher. Obviously the girl before chose a fictional character with fiery blue hair. This person has chosen a teacher. My first real crush was my 5th grade teacher. I didn't realise at the time how much of a crush it was, but it definitely felt heavy. I remember respecting her a lot because she was a brilliant teacher too. And whenever one of the kids misbehaved or was rude to her, I wanted to stand up for her, hoping that she would notice that I was the good guy. I cringe at myself now. I would sit up a little bit straighter when she walked past. I would volunteer to hand out worksheets, and I once rewrote an entire homework assignment because she said I had potential, which in hindsight is a really weird, intense reaction. I just remember feeling really embarrassed because none of my friends that I knew had crushes on adults. They were all like, oh my god, love the girl who plays Lizzie McGuire, and I was emotionally attached to this woman who owned multiple cardigans and had a mug that said world's okayest teacher. I did get teased by friends sometimes though for always putting the apple on her desk. I'm American. This is a tradition that we do. I do remember being terrified she'd find out somehow. I remember just crushing on her so bad, and I'd be so worried that one day she'd just turn over to me and say, You've got weird energy. Looking back now as an adult, I think I was embarrassed because it was the first time I realised attraction wasn't about choosing. It just happened. And it's happened to someone who absolutely did not need that information if it got into their hands. Sometimes she'd lean over and check my homework. She had massive titties. And I'd want to kiss her so bad, but knew I could never. I heard she's married with kids now. Good for her. Good for her and her big titties. You sound like you've had a lot of emotional awareness and you've thought about it a lot since and what that meant for you, so good for you. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this short but sweeter episode today. You see what I did there? And again, we're going to be doing multiple versions of these over the next few months, every third week of the month. So if you want to drop a message on Instagram, which is sexonomic.pod, please feel free, and we will start dropping in suggestions of anonymous voices you want us to cover. We love hearing your spicy stories. I remember when I did an episode with Noe, and we still want to know what happened to Trish, the cougar mum who was sleeping with her boss's but family friend's son, who also worked at the company. I just love your batshit crazy input, guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.